Hi, Alchemists. I'm Tyler, your host of the Elemental Educator podcast. And if you're joining us for the first time today, thank you for tuning in. If you like what you hear, be sure to like, subscribe, rate, follow on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from. And check out our website, elementaleducator.com. There you'll not only find the podcast, but you'll find some other courses, workshops, things to be a part of, and really join the community. I'm so excited to get into this episode today with Dr. Poppy Gibson. So get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning.
This is the Elemental Educator, the podcast where we kindle the fires of dialogue with the alchemists of education. We're here to embark on a journey where ancient wisdom meets the contemporary world of education. On Elemental Educator, we dive into the deep waters of adaptability, feel the grounding earth of core values, ride the swift winds of change, and ignite the fiery spirit of risk-taking. Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator. And now your host, Tyler Como.
Hello and welcome to the Elemental Educator podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and today we have a special guest ready to empower you. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Poppy Gibson. Dr. Gibson is a senior lecturer in education at the School of Education, Chelmsford, with a profound expertise in children's psychological development, mental health, and well-being. With over a decade of experience in London primary schools and a focus on innovative educational practices, Dr. Gibson brings a wealth of knowledge on how we can better support children's learning and development. Her insights into the intersection of education, mental health, and technology will offer invaluable perspectives for our listeners. Welcome to the Elemental Educator podcast, Dr. Gibson. It is a pleasure to have you here.
What a lovely introduction. Thank you very much. Really excited to talk to you.
Very excited to unpack everything that you have to offer. And the big question first, I just want to know your story. How did you get to where you are now?
Oh, you're starting with a big question, but I guess just passion, just love of learning. And I thought knowledge is empowering. Whatever knowledge we're looking at, being able to learn more, for me personally, it feels super empowering. So I've always had this love affair with education, always knew I wanted to be a teacher, taught in primary schools, as you said, for 11 years. And then when I was finishing my PhD, started teaching adults and just loved that even more. And the interest that brought to it, learning more about their own journeys, their personal struggles and challenges. And that's really what's kept me in education. Although I know many teachers at the moment, I don't know if you have the crisis over there, but we do have a lot of people leaving teaching. But for me, I guess I just took that sidestep. But everything that I do is just driven by this pure, unadulterated love of learning.
That's awesome to hear. We'll unpack the earth a little bit here as we go there, as well as a lot of the adversity and change implementations that you talked about. But along the way, for my journey at least, I didn't grow up saying, I want to be an educator. I grew up wanting to be something totally different. Did you have a moment in your pursuit of your career where it just clicked and you were like, yep, this was the right decision. I knew all of my thoughts were right?
I've got to say, I'm not going to answer that until I hear what your thing was that you wanted to do.
Oh, I wanted to be a police officer.
Oh, what changed your mind?
You know what? I actually, when I graduated, I wanted to play athletics in post-secondary, and I went wherever I could get a scholarship. And so I ended up playing volleyball at just a community college, and it was a great time. And when it was done, I thought I should probably do something with my life beyond it, because if I'm playing community college, I'm not going to make money doing it professionally. So I pursued a Bachelor of Science, and I got a kinesiology degree and totally shifted gears from police officer and said, I'm going to be a nurse or I'm going to be a physiotherapist, and hated the practicums. It wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't rewarding. My story along the way, though, was I was a tennis coach, and I was the head coach of the city that I was doing my degrees in. And I loved working with the adults and the kids, and I'd go into schools and run programs, and they said, you should get into education. And I tried it and I liked it. And I was like, this is sweet. I want to make a bigger impact. And so here we are having these conversations. Wow. Is this my podcast or yours? There was a good question.
I'm just being nosy. I couldn't let you go without that one being answered. So
No, that was awesome. That was awesome. So yeah, I jumped all over the place, settled on education, and just found out that just like you, I love watching people grow, and I love watching people have that aha moment and fulfill themselves. Not only that, I love the feeling of helping an adult get that clicking moment where they realize how to help people grow, because there's so much power in that one too.
Yeah, and knowing that you're having that ripple effect through someone is really amazing, isn't it? To think you're not just helping that person grow, but they're helping someone else with those pedagogical skills and tools that you've helped them develop. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the best job in the world. It's just sadly not one of the best paid or easiest on our mental health.
No, it's a tough job, and there's so much we'll unpack with that too. But now we got to come back to your question here. So what was your clicking moment, that aha moment where it was validating for your journey?
I'll be honest, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but even I was awful at school. I was terrible at school. I was terrible even at university. So I went to 18 onto my teaching degree. But even then, I was still very disengaged on the university campus with the university work. But the times it clicked was every time I went into a primary school. So the way that it works here in England is you normally have a 3-year degree with several placements. And every time I went on placement, I would just love being with the children, love talking to them, working with them, getting to know them. I'd go back to uni for my seminars. I was so bored. I wanted to drop out. And then next week I'd go back into school and I was surrounded by 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and had to keep reminding myself of the end goal. And I think that's always been something that's kept me going through life, is always just think, what's the goal? And not being afraid if the goal shifts, like just find a new goal. It's fine to change and have different ideas. But yeah, I guess the moment it clicks is whenever I'm teaching or learning myself. And then I remember how much I love learning. And then it reminds me why I do what I do, despite, as you mentioned, the poor pay and the poor mental health.
And you know what? There's ways to find joy within it all that make those things feel not so bad along the way. And as long as everybody finds their joy within it, because if you're not finding joy doing it, you probably shouldn't be here. You got to find your joy. And if you're not finding it, you got to go find something else. Now, okay, I have to ask before I move on. As an Ed D candidate myself, I know the emphasis on sometimes people like to always be referred to as doctor. Or do you want Dr. Gibson or do you want Poppy moving forward?
No, just Poppy's fine. Yeah.
There we go. So Poppy, though, Earth represents the core values to me, and Elemental Educator, Earth is the root of everything. It brings everything back to that belief, that core value. We unpacked it a little bit with you, but how have these values guided your journey from teaching in primary schools to becoming a senior lecturer in higher ed? And how do these values influence your work with both children and adults?
Yeah, such a good question. And I think this is really interesting thinking about the elements. That's actually why I agreed to come on, because your podcast sounds something a little bit different. I must say, I've seen a lot of education podcasts. I think it's a really interesting concept. Sorry, I always will go off tangent on every question for the rest of this episode.
That's
but
perfect.
I think for me, the value comes in seeing people see themselves. And so for me, the teaching's never been about what subject I'm teaching, what the exam is they're going to do, what the academic content is. For me, it's just about the people. So I've always just been guided by, when I was choosing schools, I was never looking what were their standard test outcomes, where are they on a league table. I was thinking, who are these families and who are these children and what are their dreams going to be and who are these teachers working here? And so for me, the value's always just been about human connection and wanting to be, as you said, part of someone's journey and part of their growth. I think for me, the value has just been about human connection. And even if we look back to prehistoric times when people were learning the very basic needs from Maslow's hierarchy about shelter and being safe, I think what's amazing in 2024 is we're still driven by those innate basic needs to feel safe, to feel connected, to embrace community. And I think that's what I love holding close when I teach. It's not about what I'm teaching, it's about who I'm teaching. And that's what I love. It's all just about connection, 100%. It's about mutual respect. It's about having interest in who's in the room with you. Things that maybe I didn't always feel when I was the student. And now that's what I want, is people to just have a really holistic, empowering moment when they step in the classroom with me and just learning more about who they are. For me, that's why I think education is the most meaningful thing we have, because it's not just learning something, but it's learning who we are as people.
And your dedication to children's psychological development and mental health, it's evident in your research and publications. It's evident in your core values. I want to hear it from you explicitly, though. What would you say your top, and this is a tough question sometimes to go to 3, so 5's okay, 7's okay. What would you say your top 3 values are?
My top 3 values? Ooh, I feel like I'm going to answer this wrong. Is there a right or wrong answer?
No, there's absolutely not.
Okay, my top values. You're asking me really hard questions. Now I shouldn't have come on this podcast because I normally get asked much easier questions than it. I guess the top one is don't compromise on yourself. So equally when I'm with learners, I don't want them to feel embarrassed. I don't want them to feel any prejudice. I want them to be themselves and come openly into the learning space. So 100% not compromising. And it's not always easy when we have so many boundaries and boxes in society that mean people do feel prejudiced. But for me, it's about not masking, not compromising, and just showing up. So that's number one always. And that is what I try to do, to show up and just be me authentically also as a role model. The second one is definitely, there's something about respect 100%. And I think it comes from embracing everyone and their difference, the need for everyone to respect each other with those differences as well. And I think that's something that I was really keen for us to do in the primary school, but now equally keen with my adult learners, that we all appreciate we are different and we're coming from different backgrounds, different experiences, we have different preconceptions, and that there never is that judgment, and it is a nurtured, safe space to learn. I think that's the best way we learn, when we're not afraid to ask questions. So definitely number two is just about respecting everyone. And then the third one, for me, a big value in life is about being curious. So I have 3 children. The amount of times where they're watching TV and adverts come on, and they'll say, particularly, this is really about my youngest, my daughter, she's 5, and she'll say, Mom, I want this, Mom, I want this, Mom, come see this advert. And I go in and it's just single-use plastic with googly eyes. And I think she doesn't really need that. What she needs is just to be curious about something. So like even this morning, I just got some ice out the freezer, literally some blocks of ice, some cups of water, some foil, some cutlery. And in the end, my 2 older children, one is a teenager, were both also digging around on this tray. And that was really cool. And I think a key value for me is being curious and inspiring that curiosity in others. I want to make others curious, whatever it's about, because our world is so magical. And I think the problem with education is where we lose sight of that, and we lose the curiosity and the creativity, and we become exam focused or assessment focused. So a big value for me is just staying curious about our world always.
And you were worried you were going to say something wrong. These are great values to have. And similarly, though, I've heard the word non-negotiables in actually quite a few people's values, and needing to set yourself what we call non-negotiables. So the things you're not willing to budge on or move on, and what you're really going to stand for. I hear a lot of transparency. I hear a lot of love as people's core values. And those are all relatable
Love
words
that.
to the things you're sharing as well. And so very strong, but specifically looking at the 3 that you named, how are they carried with you as you navigate challenges in the academic world?
Do you know, maybe having these values, living my values, has led to a lot of change in my life, because I think as soon as I have ever felt like I have had to compromise on who I am, honestly, that gives me the ick, and that's it. I'm on the job websites, like I'm out. And I think that's one thing I've always been very good at. I think particularly as teachers, we forget how valuable we are. We forget how many schools are out there, how many classrooms are out there, how many transferable skills you have. And we sometimes become institutionalized. But I think knowing that I do not want to compromise on myself after going through my education journey up to 21 and always feeling like I've never quite fit in the classroom, now that I'm in charge, now that I'm in the driving seat as a teacher, I've never once compromised. And whenever I've seen opportunity for growth, or I felt stunted from growing, that's it.
It's quite powerful to even relate it to curiosity, because a big push is to have highly engaging starters in your classrooms. And so how are you engaging kids in writing every day? How are you engaging them in numeracy every day? How are you engaging them in just their thought process? So promoting curiosity and establishing that value in a classroom, there's so much power in that as well. And even to establish it in a classroom with adults. But I love what you're talking about, setting that non-negotiable. And it's funny, you call it giving the ick, and so you run away from it. And you know what? I can resonate with that as well. I will always push back a little bit first and say, this isn't right. What can we do? And then obviously if it's not moving, you got to part your ways. And
Yeah.
to me, that starts to play with the air element, which is the adversity we face. And so Poppy, this is really about overcoming adversity. And I'm hoping you can share a significant challenge you faced in your career, maybe particularly when moving between your roles or institutions, and how you overcame it.
Oh, there's been a few. Maybe I tell you about one in school. So when I was a primary school teacher, for me, one of the schools I worked in, and I will not name, but the leadership style was just not my style of doing things. And the management in the school was very hierarchical and very top heavy and very outcome focused. And I'll always remember one day I had to go feedback to management how my class were doing. And I said, oh, there's a group of children, 4 children. I'd like to spend my lunchtimes doing an intervention with them. And they said, oh, which children are they? And I said, they're the children with special educational needs. And they said, oh, they won't even be sitting the assessments. Don't spend your time on them. And from that moment, I knew I couldn't stay in that school. And I actually resigned the next day.
Wow. And
So,
again,
yeah,
that rooting it to your value, which is something to be said, right? That's very commendable because that can be a very scary decision to walk away from your job, because that sets you up financially for life, which can be difficult to think about the fear of not having that anymore. So kudos to you for staying rooted in that. Now, to another topic, similarly with AIR, you did shift though from primary education to higher education.
yeah,
What kind of challenges did you encounter in that transition?
everything. So I went from feeling like a bit of a big fish in a small pond because I'd been teaching in primary schools for 11 years. I'd been in leadership. I felt like I knew the UK curriculum inside out, our English curriculum. And I thought, yeah, I took a risk. I got interviewed for being a lecturer at uni. I was like, I'm sure this will be fine. And then just got thrown in the deep end and instantly reverted from being like whale shark to being like a minnow or something tiny, totally out of my depth with no transitional support. The good thing was that I love a challenge and I was excited to work with adults. And I knew the content because I had lived being a teacher. So I had the lived experience. And I think sometimes we underestimate how valuable lived experience is. So luckily, I guess I found my fins and it worked out. But it was scary. But I do think that if something feels right in your gut, you have to trust it, even if it feels scary. So it was a big leap. But now I can never imagine going back to primary school. I absolutely love higher education. I'm just about to start my year. Next month will be my 8th year in higher education.
And it's both of these stories that you're sharing, they resonate with core values to me. And so the first one was a violation of your non-negotiables that you set up. And the second one, you started to flourish in this adversity because your curiosity came out, which is what you said was that third value in you. And so it's good to see that these values are shining through in the decisions you're making and how you're able to stay grounded when it. Now,
interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that before. Yeah.
You did on the form that you filled out had mentioned that you didn't receive a promotion in higher ed, and this led you to changing universities. After not receiving a promotion, you made a decision to change universities as well, which is a very bold decision as well, and probably came with a lot of adversity. What did you learn from that experience?
It's super raw and fresh because this is 2 months ago.
Okay.
And I can definitely tell you how it happened. But again, I was loving the university that I was in, absolutely adored it, and I loved everything about it. Incredible colleagues, incredible students. It just so happened, and I think sometimes promotion paperwork and promotion pathways aren't always set up to be usable for people. And I think that I'd put out to the universe that if I don't get this promotion, even though I love the job and I love the university, it's a sign that I need to change something. And so I'd already manifested doors. That sounds really silly. But the day that I found out that I didn't get the promotion, and I really felt good about it because I wanted to apply last year and my head of school said, no, wait a year. So I did. And I did so much stuff. Like I couldn't have worked harder. The day that I found out I didn't get it, I was absolutely brokenhearted. But then I remembered my promise, like to myself, that if you don't get it, it's a sign to change. And that same day, a job came up at this other university, the Open University, where I've now just taken the role. And although I loved where I was before, it just made me think maybe something's not aligned here. And the fact that this other job came up the same day and I got this job and now I'm just starting there. Yeah. And I forgot what your original question was, but I guess it's about feeling valued. And although I did feel valued there, I guess there was something that didn't feel quite right. I was open to a new door. And now, yeah, so grateful for everything that happened before, but super excited for a new chapter.
You use the words open to a new door, which I like the pun on it and the play there. I used the words,
No.
you were rooted though in your curiosity, and that's what drove you to think it was okay to go somewhere else because you wanted to see what it was like. So you brought it back to your values still yet again when you faced adversity. Now, Poppy, water represents ability to implement change, which
Mhm.
in all of these adverse moments that you just talked about, you took initiative to make a change. So how have you driven meaningful change within your roles though, especially in those areas of mental health interventions and digital culture and education?
Yeah, I think the main thing is obviously we can do change anecdotally. Like if we have an idea, we want to pilot something new. But I think sometimes the best changes are grounded in evidence. So certainly I read a lot. And I think if you're going to other people with ideas for change, they'll want to know that it has legs. So being able to show them maybe where something similar has happened somewhere else, or give them more of a pictorial idea of what the change might look like, that's going to help you have people on board as well. So I think for me, whenever I've worked with staff who've been a little bit scared of change, firstly, it's about being transparent so they know what you can control and what is out of your control. But secondly, helping them to see why hopefully the change will be for good. And also not sugarcoating it that it will all be perfect. I think whenever we are experiencing change, we want to know that, again, back to being human, we want to know that things might be a roller coaster, but we're all in it together. So definitely something in change has always been about community, transparency, and the key one, communication. Just communicating what's happening as we go through change. Just like we as adults like to know what's happening, what's coming up. The same with change. I think communicating with people how things are going, why things are changing, means that everyone is on the same page. So, yeah, any changes I've ever had to implement within the workplace have always just been about communicating fairly with everyone around me.
Coming back to the why on it and being transparent, earlier you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I referenced that to the reptilian brain and recognizing that we
Mm-hmm.
have a fight or flight response and the need to feel safe before you can go about a change process. And so creating a space where your body bypasses that first step and says, okay, this is safe, and it can go back for a second opinion to help with judgment. Now, with that, your move into higher ed, it was driven, you said you love to read. It was driven with this passion for research and working with adults. How have you implemented change in your teaching methods or research since making that transition?
Oh, good question. I think a lot of it has been being open to feedback. I think because I was very much learning, it was about talking to colleagues, asking them to come and observe my lessons and give me feedback, to co teach, but also getting feedback from the learners. And I think that's the great thing about when you work with adults, especially, is you could, if you have built that strong relationship, you can ask them, what did you love about the lesson? But also, what could I improve for next time? And just have those very open and honest conversations. And it's not always easy because you like to think you're the best teacher you can be, but actually the best teacher, I think, is a reflective practitioner. So not being afraid to communicate with your learners. If I taught this again, what should I do differently? Or even about the activities, was it a balance of active and passive activities? Using different tools of engagement and seeing what they think of them rather than just thinking, I'm sure they'll love doing this online quiz. Actually, afterwards saying, did you enjoy the quiz? Would you rather do it a different way? So I think for me, it's very much being about just communicating and not being afraid to continue to change my pedagogy as I've grown.
And it's the microcycles of Lewin's change theory that you're bringing up of we have to unfreeze, make a change, refreeze, see where it's at. It's that
Oh,
self-reflection change process.
tell me
Yeah.
about it. I haven't heard of it.
And so it's the idea of unfreezing, preparing for the desired change, the change itself. So implementing what you wanted to implement. And then that refreezing is the solidifying and adopting the desired change. And then there's a little step in between of that, all of that, which is reflection, and then coming back to if you need to unfreeze, change, and refreeze again. And so it's just little microcycles, what you're describing of the essentials of change theory, right? And change process.
Yeah, I never heard of that theorist. I will definitely look that up. But yeah, the key there is the reflection, isn't it? The key. And that's something we need to make space for as educators 100% every day.
And you mentioned it earlier, the whole idea of lived experience when change is occurring and connecting people that have lived experience through certain events with other people can be quite powerful. Everybody's going to experience it differently, but getting that collective mindset of what lived experience could be is a very empowering thing that helps people overcome a lot of that error and that adversity that they face.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think all we want as humans is to be seen, right? So when you find those people that can relate to you in some way, whether it's through the same neurodivergence or the same disability or the same, you grew up in the same part of the country, it gives you something tangible that connects you with someone else. And I think that is really powerful, particularly when you're in a learning space. So you might already have those feelings of discomfort and nervousness. To know that you're with other people that you can relate to is really empowering.
Very, very rooted in epistemology and just that understanding and how we make sense of the world, right? And
Definitely,
connecting the
definitely.
two. Love that. Now, Poppy, FIRE embodies this idea of taking risks and making decisions, which from these values we talked about to the adversity you face to the changes you've implemented, it's really all of just the decision making process is what you've gone about. What has been one of the riskiest decisions you've made? And when I use the word risky, I don't mean dangerous, I just mean bold. What was one of the more out there decisions that you've had to make?
Can I do something fun?
Yeah, let's do something fun. Sure.
Okay, something fun. And this was really recent as well. Actually, a highlight of the uni that I've just left. And again, this is quite a cool story because it came out of failure and it moved into success. So I was approached by a professor at my university, Professor Sanrita, about working on a bid with her, a research bid. And she needed an education academic. I'm very much a yes person. I was like, yes, let's work on the bid. So we worked together for about 6 months on this bid. We put in the bid, and sadly, we didn't win the money for the research. However, what was really cool from that is Sanrita said to me, oh, can we actually have a conversation about something else? She's from India, from West Bengal, and her father had founded a school there many years ago, a primary school. And she actually said, I wonder whether there's some partnership we could make between the school in India, in Calcutta, and our university. Maybe even get some of your students to go out there. So we pursued this conversation. We met with him, we met with the university, the kind of my head of school, and we managed to then make a plan to win some money from something called the Turing Fund, which is a British government fund for widening participation for students who are like first generation to uni or from disadvantaged backgrounds. I created like an application process and we chose 3 students to come to India for 28 days. And this just happened. So this happened in July this year. I went with them for the first week to settle them in. We got to live at the school, stay at the school, teach. So I taught English out there, and the students stayed for 28 days. And it was the most amazing, life-changing thing. And it came from, yeah, not winning a bid to having another conversation and to definitely taking a risk. I hadn't been to India. None of the students had been to India, so they were also super risky to even apply. But they all absolutely loved it, as did I. It was transformative. So definitely shows don't be afraid to just have dreams and big conversations because you never know, they might come true.
So I'm listening to this story and I can't help but think how aligned it was with your earth. You talked about
Yeah.
communication being a very strong value for you. The communication that came after not having a successful bid led you to feeling confident in it and comfortable with the decision. It didn't breach any of those non-negotiables that you'd set up. And having one of curiosity, I mean, it's not a surprise that the risk probably felt amazing because it was something very cool that you got to pursue. So rooting that risk into your core values made it probably feel not as big of a risk as what it might have been in the moment. Now,
That's true. Yeah, this is true.
in you've had various leadership roles. Aside from just the fun decision making processes, there are decisions that a leader has to make that involves the balancing of needs of students with wanting to be innovative and creative and try something. And there's that risk that you have to tiptoe between, are you going too far? Is it going the wrong direction? How did you navigate that decision making process?
Yeah, I think it's always hard when you have to have difficult conversations with anyone, whatever they're about. But I think the main thing to do in that situation is just have empathy. Whether it's that they wanted to do a project in a certain way, they wanted to arrange a placement in a setting that you knew wasn't suitable, they wanted to maybe do a research project with students that you knew were too vulnerable to be on a project. It's always hard, but I think if you can be empathetic and also compassionate, I think what's really important is showing your compassion, not just saying no to whatever it is, but showing that you see them, you hear them, you understand what they wanted to do or why they didn't want to do something, and just give them space to air that. So I think a big part of negotiating those difficult conversations is also listening. Just remembering that it should be a partnership. It shouldn't be you leading every conversation, but giving someone space to talk about how they're feeling, to talk about the negative emotions that have come out of a decision, But then for you to show that compassion, empathy, I think is again back to being human and what's so important. And I think that's what means you can carry on having a good relationship with them. For example, when we didn't win that bid, I could have thought, I'm not going to work with Sunrita again, and she could have thought the same about me. But actually we thought, where else do we have crossover? What other opportunities could we explore? And I think it's the same in any relationship. Just see things as being a dead end of a relationship, but see them as perhaps just leading you on a different pathway.
And it's important that you mention the listening and taking it in. When you reference one of your values in communication, and transparency and communication is very strongly rooted with myself as well. Communicating is not a one-way street. It's not just one person talking. To be a good communicator means that you are a good listener and you're actively listening and you're there for the people to support them. And if you have strong communication, usually the compassion and the empathy come along with it as well.
This is true. This is true. Do you have a charity over there called the Samaritans?
We might. I wouldn't know.
Oh, so they're really big here in the UK, and they're a listening service. So they're an anonymous call service. They're
Okay.
24/7, and if somebody wants to talk about a problem, something that's going on in their life, but they feel they can't talk to friends, family, they can call them. So I'm a trained Samaritan. What's really interesting when I did my training is the whole thing is about listening. Like, you think it would all be about questions or advice, but actually you're not even allowed to give advice. It is just about listening. And I think I've definitely taken that into the classroom. When someone brings a problem to me, actually even not in the classroom, even if just like a friend or a family member brings something to me, I now just think what they are seeking is someone to listen. They're not looking for advice. They're not looking for my anecdote of when I did something similar 5 years ago. They're looking for a listener. And so again, the Samaritans charity is amazing, but that's why they're so needed, because people just need to be heard. Right, 100% agree that the main part of communication is actually listening and not speaking.
I just did a little look on the way here. Not the same name, but we do have those very similar services. As soon as you mentioned call centers, right? We do have a lot of really good ones here in Canada. At least Kids Help Phone exists. 988 for anybody listening. Call or text if you need somebody to talk to or support. There's several crisis lines set up for each province as well. So thank you very much for sharing that. Now, bigger question here as we start to get close to the end of this. What are you hoping people action in their lives tomorrow from your message?
Do you know what I think it would be? Back to what we said about reflect. I think every day we have the chance to reflect on how happy we are with what our life looks like, whether that's with relationships or friendships or our eating behaviors, our work, which is a big part of life for many of us. I think don't be afraid to just take stock and think, what am I happy with in my life that can stay the same? But are there some changes I want to make? And then just be brave and change them, because ultimately you're in the driving seat. You're the only person, despite all the nagging of your mom or whoever. My mom's nagged me my whole life. It has no effect, because honestly, you're in the driving seat. And if you want to make changes, there will never be a good time. Don't think this isn't the right time, because life has an amazing way of always bringing something new. So just make the changes now. Don't wait a year, 5 years, 10 years, because it might be too late. So I would just say, reflect on your life. If you're happy with everything, that's amazing. You don't need to change anything. Apart from make sure that they're following your podcast and listening to your podcast. Just check in with yourself and think, what are you happy with, or what could you change?
Well, and change is the only constant. And one of the quotes I've come by that I've really gravitated to is, if you think you can or you can't, you're probably right.
I love that. Yes.
So it's all about what you believe in. Now,
it's all about self-belief. Yeah.
Exactly. And we know that you've taken on a new role, but what does your future look like maybe beyond this role?
Like, where will I go?
Or in tangent with it, what are you hoping your future brings?
So I think the exciting thing about the role I've just taken on is, for the first time in 18 years, I'm not actually going to be teaching students directly. And instead, this new role is designing content, designing the curriculum for the students, and then focusing on my research. So I'm just super excited to focus on research. I've already had one professor reach out with a mental health project with young people that we've just chatted about. I'm really excited for that. So I put in some bids, maybe work with you on something, some
I'm
research.
ready for that. I was going to get there.
International, but long term, I think I've learned just to go with the flow, because I started teaching at 21 thinking I just want to climb the ranks and be a head teacher. And if you told me that wouldn't happen, I'd end up teaching adults that are all taller than me. I'm like 5 foot. I would not have believed it. Some of them are older than me. That's a really interesting dynamic. But I've realized that none of that matters. You just have to go with the flow and follow your heart 100%. So as for where the future holds, who knows?
That's fair, and thank you for sharing. I'm absolutely open to collaborating on some work here together as well. I have a book hopefully coming out in April 2025, The Elemental Leader, which is similar to the podcast and the show on guiding people through elements.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And the dissertation is all around principleship decision making and the support or lack of that they receive from senior leaders and how to optimize support when making decisions. And anything along those lines, I'm happy to talk about that. I'm happy to talk about the brain and neurodiversity and how things work as well.
We will carry on some conversations after the podcast.
Absolutely. So I know how we're going to stay in touch, but I have to ask, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Yes, please come find me. And I'm really happy as well to receive direct messages or emails from anyone. You can find me on Twitter, Gibson UK. You'll find me on Instagram, Poppy Gibson. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Just look up Poppy Gibson. Or if you want to email me directly, I'm really happy to have conversations about your own pathway or your own career choices. Is poppy.gibson@open.ac. That's my professional work email. But really happy if anyone wants to get in touch or connect. We'll definitely connect back.
And we'll make sure to put all of those in the description of this episode, so make sure you check that out to get in touch with Poppy. Alchemists, I'm Tyler, your host of the Elemental Educator. It has been my absolute pleasure to get to sit down and have a wonderful conversation with Dr. Poppy Gibson. Poppy, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to sit down with me.
Thank you. And can I say, this podcast is super refreshing. I really love how you're looking at education from this different angle with the elements. So yeah, good luck. And I can't wait to listen to the rest of your episodes.
You've been listening to the Elemental Educator. Our aim is to illuminate optimal educational practices on a global scale. And second, we want to shine a light on the expertise and knowledge that Tyler brings to educational institutions. He's not just a talking head. He's a practicing educator, a school principal, armed with a master's in educational administration, and on the brink of completing his doctorate. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator. And to contact us, fire off an email. See what I did there? Fire off. Okay. Send an email to elementaleducator@gmail.com. See you next time on the Elemental Educator.